Imagine for a moment that you could travel back in time and organize the greatest military confrontation in history. On one side, the Roman legions, the most efficient war machine the ancient world has ever known. On the other, the medieval knights, armored warriors who dominated battlefields for centuries. Who would truly win? The answer may surprise you completely. Over the next 70 minutes, we'll delve into a detailed analysis that will consider not only weaponry and tactics, but also factors most people never imagined. Prepare to discover truths that will change your perception of these two types of warriors forever. If you're curious to find out which of these legendary military forces would emerge victorious, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what time you're watching this content. Your participation is essential for us to continue producing in-depth historical analysis like this one. To truly understand who would win between Roman legionaries and medieval knights, we must first understand that we are comparing two completely different military philosophies, separated by nearly 1,000 years of technological and social evolution. Roman legionaries represented the pinnacle of organized warfare in the ancient world, while medieval knights symbolized individual power and the supremacy of heavy cavalry. This is not simply a question of who had the better weapons, but rather of entire military systems in conflict. The typical Roman legionary of the 1st century AD was the product of a revolutionary military system that transformed ordinary men into a disciplined war machine. Each soldier carried approximately 25 kilograms of equipment, including his famous lorica segmentata, a suit of articulated iron plates that offered excellent protection while maintaining mobility. His rectangular shield, the scutum, was not only defensive, but also an offensive weapon capable of disarming enemies and creating openings for attack. The gladius sword, only 2 feet long, was designed specifically for close quarters combat, prioritizing lethal thrusts over spectacular cuts. But what truly made the legionaries formidable wasn't their individual weapons, but their ability to operate as a cohesive unit. Roman training was brutal and continuous. Soldiers marched 40 kilometers a day carrying full equipment, practiced complex maneuvers until they were instinctive, and developed an iron discipline that kept them steadfast even in the most desperate situations. The famous testudo, or turtle, formation allowed entire units to advance protected by a mobile wall of shields, virtually immune to enemy projectiles. Roman military engineering was equally impressive. In a matter of hours, a legion could construct a fortified camp, complete with walls, ditches, and watchtowers. This ability to rapidly create defensive positions gave the Romans a huge strategic advantage, allowing them to control territory and dictate the terms of combat. Their siege engines, from catapults to battering rams, were feats of precise engineering that could topple the most robust fortifications of the time. The medieval knight, on the other hand, represented a completely different approach to warfare. Emerging in the 9th century and reaching its apogee in the 12th and 13th centuries, the knight was not just a soldier, but a noble warrior whose identity was intrinsically linked to mounted combat. His armor evolved over the centuries, from simple chainmail to the elaborate plate armor of the late medieval period, some weighing over 30 kilograms, but offering nearly complete protection against most weapons of the time. The knight's lance, often over 3 meters long, transformed horse and rider into a devastating projectile capable of piercing enemy ranks with tremendous force. The medieval warhorse, or destrier, was bred specifically for combat, weighing between 500 and 800 kilograms, trained to attack enemies with hooves and teeth, and capable of maintaining speed even while carrying a fully armed knight. The combination of weight, speed, and weaponry made the medieval cavalry charge one of the most feared forces on the European battlefield. But the knights also developed sophisticated tactics beyond the simple frontal charge. The wedge formation allowed for maximum force to be concentrated at a specific point in the enemy lines, while flanking maneuvers exploited the cavalry's superior mobility. Experienced knights knew when to attack, when to retreat, and how to use the terrain to their advantage. Their individual combat prowess was legendary, the result of a lifetime of martial training since childhood. Now, When we imagine these two types of warriors in direct confrontation, we must consider multiple scenarios, as the outcome would depend greatly on the specific circumstances of the encounter. In open fields, with terrain favorable to cavalry, horsemen would have significant advantages. The speed and impact of a coordinated, heavy cavalry charge could potentially disrupt Roman formations, especially if the legionaries lacked time to prepare adequately. However, the Romans were no strangers to combating cavalry. They faced the Parthian cataphracts, heavy cavalry comparable to medieval knights, and developed specific tactics to neutralize mounted attacks. The square formation, with lances pointing outward in all directions, created a virtually impenetrable barrier for horses. The Romans also employed specialized auxiliary troops, including Syrian archers and Balearic slingers, capable of wreaking havoc on approaching cavalry. A crucial factor often overlooked in this comparison is the difference in numbers and organization. A full Roman legion included approximately 5,000 soldiers, but rarely operated alone. Legions were often deployed in groups of 2 or 3, accompanied by auxiliary forces that could double or triple the total number of combatants. Knights, on the other hand, rarely managed to muster more than a few hundred warriors in a single battle, limited both by resources and the feudal nature of their social organization. Logistical sustainability also favored the Romans. Their legions were permanent organizations with well-established supply systems, capable of maintaining operations for months or even years. Medieval knights, despite their individual effectiveness, depended on feudal structures for funding and supplies, significantly limiting the duration of their campaigns. A protracted war would inevitably favor the side with better logistical organization. The terrain aspect cannot be underestimated. In open, flat fields, medieval cavalry would have a clear advantage, able to utilize their mobility and striking power to the fullest. But in rugged terrain, dense forests, or marshy areas, the knights would lose much of their effectiveness, while the Roman infantry would maintain their maneuverability and combat capability. The Romans, with their engineering expertise, could also modify the terrain to their advantage, creating obstacles and fortifications that would channel enemy attacks to areas of their choosing. Analyzing the specific weaponry, we find advantages on both sides. The Roman lorica segmentata offered excellent protection against slashes and thrusts, but would be vulnerable to a direct hit from a high-speed cavalry lance. On the other hand, medieval plate armor, while heavier, provided superior protection against almost all types of attack, but could be circumvented by tactics that exploited its limited mobility. The Roman gladius, optimized for close combat, would be less effective against plate armor than a longer medieval sword. But the Romans also utilized other weapons, including the pilum, a throwing spear specifically designed to penetrate shields, and armor. The psychology of combat represents another fascinating aspect of this comparison. Roman legionaries were trained to operate as part of a larger military machine, finding courage and determination in collective unity. Their discipline was legendary, capable of maintaining formation even under extreme pressure. Medieval knights, by contrast, were individualistic warriors whose courage derived from a code of personal honor and the pursuit of individual glory. Both mindsets had advantages and disadvantages in different combat situations. One element that frequently influenced medieval battles, but would be less relevant against the Romans, was the psychological impact of cavalry charges on inexperienced troops. The sound of hundreds of galloping horses, the gleam of armor in the sun, and the sight of lowered lances instilled terror in poorly trained soldiers. However, veteran legionaries, accustomed to the horrors of war and confident in their training and equipment, would be much less susceptible to such intimidation tactics. We must also consider the technological evolution represented by each type of warrior. The first-century Romans represented the pinnacle of military technology of their time, incorporating centuries of innovation and refinement. Their metallurgical techniques, while less advanced than medieval ones, were adequate for mass-producing quality equipment. Medieval knights benefited from significant advances in metallurgy, especially in the production of high-quality steel, resulting in superior armor and weapons in terms of materials. but produced in much smaller quantities. The question of tactical adaptability is crucial to our analysis. The Romans repeatedly demonstrated their ability to adapt to new enemies and develop effective countermeasures when first confronted with war elephants. They quickly developed tactics to neutralize them. Against Parthian cavalry, they modified their formations and incorporated new weapons. This tactical flexibility, combined with their discipline and organization, allowed the Romans to effectively confront a wide variety of adversaries. Medieval knights, though masters of their specific form of combat, were less adaptable, limited by the rigidity of their martial traditions and the individualistic nature of their military approach. An often overlooked aspect is the role of military intelligence and reconnaissance. Roman legions operated with sophisticated espionage and reconnaissance systems, using auxiliary scouts to gather detailed information about enemies and terrain. This informational advantage allowed for superior tactical planning and the ability to choose when and where to fight. Medieval knights, operating in more decentralized structures, often lacked such organized intelligence capabilities. Let's now examine specific confrontation scenarios. In a pitched battle on favorable terrain, say a wide plain with no natural obstacles, an army of 1,000 cavalry faces a Roman legion complete with auxiliaries, totaling approximately 10,000 men. Initially, the cavalry would have the advantage of mobility, allowing them to choose where and when to attack. However, the Romans, with superior numbers and discipline, could form multiple defensive lines, using auxiliary archers to harass the cavalry from a distance and force them to attack under unfavorable conditions. The first cavalry charge would be the decisive moment. If the horsemen managed to break through the Roman lines and cause panic, they could exploit this advantage to defeat the enemy in detail. But if the Romans maintained their formation and absorbed the initial impact, the battle would become a struggle of attrition, clearly favoring the side with the greater number of combatants. The horsemen, after losing their initial momentum, would be vulnerable to coordinated counterattacks and would gradually be overwhelmed by the Roman infantry. In a siege scenario, the advantages would tilt even more toward the Romans. Their experience in siege warfare was unparalleled in the ancient world. With techniques refined over centuries of conquest, knights, specialized in open combat, would be less effective both attacking and defending fortifications. The Roman ability to rapidly construct siege works and sustain prolonged operations would give them a decisive advantage in this type of confrontation. Consider also an encounter in rugged terrain, such as a mountainous region or dense forest. Here, cavalry would lose much of its effectiveness. Unable to maintain formation or execute coordinated charges, Roman infantry, accustomed to operating in a variety of terrains across their vast empire, would retain its fighting capability. The flexibility of Roman formations would allow for quick adaptation to local conditions, while dismounted horsemen would be formidable warriors individually, but would lose their primary tactical advantage. The issue of military leadership is also crucial. Roman commanders were often seasoned veterans who rose through the military ranks with practical knowledge of all aspects of warfare. The Roman command system emphasized meticulous planning, coordination between units, and tactical adaptability. Medieval knight leaders, while often courageous and skilled individually, did not always possess the organizational expertise necessary to coordinate complex military operations involving large numbers of combatants. We cannot ignore the impact of projectile technology. Although both sides used bows and other long-range weapons, the Romans had a significant advantage in siege artillery and the coordination of projectile fire. Their ballista and catapults could engage cavalry at a distance, forcing them to charge under constant fire. Roman auxiliary archers, especially the famous Syrian archers, were capable of maintaining a sustained rate of fire that could inflict significant losses on compact cavalry formations. An interesting factor is the question of morale and motivation. Roman legionaries fought not only for Rome, but also for their comrades at their side and for the promise of tangible rewards after successful military service. This practical motivation, combined with professional pride and discipline, created a solid and reliable determination. Medieval knights, motivated by codes of honor, religious faith, and the pursuit of personal glory, could demonstrate extraordinary courage, but they were also more susceptible to emotional fluctuations that could affect their performance. In combat, loss sustainability represents another crucial aspect. Roman legions were organizations that could absorb significant losses and continue to function effectively, with established systems for integrating new recruits and maintaining unit cohesion. Knights, being elite warriors in limited numbers, could not sustain heavy losses without seriously compromising their military effectiveness. The loss of a few experienced knights could disproportionately affect the fighting capacity of the entire force. Let's now consider more specific aspects of military equipment. The Roman shield, a central element of legionary tactics, was designed not only for individual protection, but also to create a collective defensive wall. This dual function made it extremely effective against cavalry, capable of forming barriers that horses could not penetrate. Medieval knights, focused on individual combat, often used smaller shields or no shield at all, relying primarily on their armor for protection. The question of physical endurance and combat sustainability is also relevant. Knights in full armor, though well protected, faced significant limitations in physical endurance. The weight of the armor, the heat generated during combat, and the effort of wielding heavy weapons while mounted quickly exhausted even the most conditioned warriors. Roman legionaries, though carrying substantial equipment, were specifically trained for sustained combat and could maintain effectiveness for longer periods. An important technical element is the difference in weapon construction and use. The Roman gladius sword was a thrusting weapon optimized for use in close formations, capable of penetrating armor at vulnerable points with lethal precision. Medieval swords, being longer and heavier, were designed primarily for powerful cuts against armor but were less effective in close quarters combat. This fundamental difference in weapon design philosophy reflected the different tactical approaches of each military culture. Strategic mobility represents another interesting point of comparison. Although cavalrymen had a tactical advantage in battlefield mobility, Roman legions were superior in strategic mobility, capable of moving large numbers of men and equipment over long distances quickly and sustainably. This capability allowed the Romans to concentrate forces where needed and maintain operations on multiple fronts simultaneously. Considering environmental factors, different climatic conditions would affect each type of warrior differently. Knights in full armor were particularly vulnerable to excessive heat, with documented cases of warriors succumbing to heat exhaustion. During prolonged combat in hot weather, Roman legionaries with lighter, more ventilated armor maintained better combat capability in a wider range of climatic conditions. The issue of veterancy and military experience deserves detailed consideration. Roman legionaries served for periods of 20 to 25 years, accumulating vast experience in different types of combat and against a wide variety of enemies. This collective experience created a base of tactical knowledge that benefited the entire unit. Medieval knights, while often seasoned warriors, tended to have more limited experience, focused primarily on combat against other knights or poorly equipped infantry. We must also examine the capacity for tactical innovation. During combat, Roman command systems allowed for rapid communication and modification of tactics. As the situation evolved, commanders could reorganize their forces, implement new formations, and coordinate complex maneuvers in response to developments on the battlefield. Medieval knights, operating in more decentralized structures, had less capacity for coordinated tactical adaptation during combat. An often underestimated aspect is the role of support troops and specialists. Roman legions included not only combat soldiers, but also engineers, medics, siege specialists, and a variety of professionals who contributed to overall military effectiveness. The support infrastructure gave the Romans sustained advantages that extended far beyond direct combat. Medieval knights, focused on the ideal of the individual warrior, often lacked such organized support systems. The ability to coordinate between different types of forces represents another Roman strength. Their legions regularly operated with auxiliary cavalry, archers, slingers, and other specialized troops in an integrated system where each element complemented the others. This combined approach created a tactical flexibility that horsemen, operating primarily as a homogeneous force, could not match. Examining the issue of tactical intelligence during combat, the Romans developed sophisticated signaling systems using standards, trumpets, and other methods to coordinate troop movements even in the chaos of battle. This ability to maintain command and control under pressure was crucial for executing complex tactical maneuvers. Medieval knights, relying primarily on personal leadership and individual example, had greater difficulty maintaining coordination. During intense combat, the issue of recovery and reorganization after combat also favored the Romans. Their units could quickly regroup, treat the wounded, and resume operations with minimal reduced effectiveness. Cavalry, once scattered or disorganized, required significantly more time to reorganize for renewed combat, especially if horses were lost or injured. Considering deeper psychological aspects, the Roman collective mentality created a form of courage that was less dependent on individual factors. Soldiers fought as a unit, confident that their comrades would hold their ground regardless of the circumstances. This mutual trust created a moral stability that was difficult to break. Even under extreme pressure, the individual courage of knights, while often spectacular, was more volatile and susceptible to fluctuations based on personal circumstances or specific events of the battle. Analyzing their effectiveness against different types of targets, Roman legionaries were versatile, capable of effectively engaging both enemy infantry and cavalry. Using tactics appropriate to each situation, medieval knights, optimized for combat against light infantry and other horsemen, were less adaptable when faced with well-organized heavy infantry formations or unconventional tactics. The issue of military costs and resources would also influence any prolonged confrontation. Maintaining a Roman legion, while expensive, was economically sustainable for the empire due to its fiscal organization and broad production. Base medieval knights represented a huge investment in equipment and training, but were financially unsustainable in large numbers for prolonged periods, limiting their strategic usefulness. Considering strategic communication factors, the Romans operated with long-distance communication systems using signaling stations, organized messengers, and established routes that allowed coordination between geographically separated forces. This ability to maintain unified command over distributed operations provided enormous strategic advantages that medieval knights, operating within decentralized feudal structures, could not match. The ability to operate in diverse geographic environments represented another Roman advantage. Their legions demonstrated effectiveness in deserts, forests, mountains, marshes, and a variety of other terrains through adapted equipment and tactics. Medieval knights, specialized for open field combat, lost significant effectiveness in terrain that limited cavalry mobility. Finally, we must consider that this comparison, while fascinating, represents a hypothetical exercise that helps us better understand the unique characteristics of each military tradition. In historical reality, these warriors never faced each other during their heyday, and both represent brilliant adaptations to the military needs of their respective eras. Based on all the factors analyzed, in a hypothetical confrontation between equal forces of Roman legionaries and medieval knights, the advantage would lean toward the Romans in most scenarios. Their typical numerical superiority, superior organization, greater tactical adaptability, better logistical sustainability, and experience against heavy cavalry would create favorable conditions for a Roman victory. However, in specific circumstances ideal, terrain for cavalry, limited numbers allowing for local superiority of knights, or situations where tactical mobility was decisive, the medieval knights could prevail. The true lesson of this analysis is not simply to determine a victor, but to understand how different military cultures develop distinct solutions to the challenges of war, each representing the pinnacle of military effectiveness within its specific historical context. Both Roman legionaries and medieval knights deserve recognition as extraordinary warriors who shaped the course of human history through their military excellence.